Okay, that's as aligned as it's going to get, I think. Good afternoon, British and American culture students. Thank you for your effort on the midterm. The assignments are all graded, and you can see your scores online. Next week, it'll be another few days before I can get through the midterm exams, but you'll have your results next week. I want to say that as far as the assignments are concerned, which are done, those assignments in the 8 or 9 years that I've taught this class, um, these are probably overall the best submissions, the best papers that I've seen. So this means several things. As far as I could tell, there wasn't any overt cheating, which means that nothing was completely copied from, excuse me, a book or a website, and wasn't generated by AI, but that you did your work honestly and submitted it with your own effort. Some people had lower scores because they relied too much on summarizing and on information they found from various sources. But as I said, I didn't really require you to use a reference, but the second assignment that we do this month in November, you will have to include at least one reference to show where you got your information from. Of course, it's good for you to use a reference and to research and access information and put it into your paper, but not to rely too heavily on that as the only thing, the only major thing that is communicated in your assignment. So there were several people who got perfect scores. I rarely give perfect scores. Just it's an English thing. If you make mistakes grammatically or logically, you can't get perfect. But I guess I'm getting older, maybe, and maybe it's slightly more generous. But there was a few people that they just did an outstanding job of the assignment. So there were a few perfects. There were a few 20 out of 20 papers. So I think I'll talk about those. I'll talk about some good papers and bad ones. How I judge them and what I expect and what you need to do to get a higher grade on Friday, not today. But we'll talk about that on Friday. And today we will introduce the second half of the class. We've only done the introduction up to chapter 3, which means there's 8 chapters in this book. So we have to pick up the pace a little bit. There is no test this Friday, but the lecture will have a lot of material in it, and next Friday we'll have to do the third quiz, and then 2 weeks after that we'll have to do the last quiz, and you'll have to do one assignment that's based on American culture in addition to those 2 quizzes, and then suddenly it'll be December and it'll be exam time. So let's talk about chapter 4. I chose the title The Hard Fork, and the question mark is on week 9 because already week 9, I'm surprised we're this far. If it's true, I think it is, but the most important thing about this is the fact that European culture, European society is increasingly focused on the so-called Atlantic. The European countries, the Atlantic European countries, increasingly have an advantage, whereas when we talked about the Crusades and we talked about the 100 Years' War and the Black Death and so on, the most powerful countries in Europe were Central European countries like France and the Holy Roman Empire and the Italian states, because they had access to trade through the Mediterranean, through the Arabian Peninsula, Turkey, the Black Sea towards Asia, because that was, you know, the flow of trade was the greatest wealth to be had. The way to be successful and to be wealthy was to have access to the Asian market through the water and land routes in the Middle East and Central Asia. To get around dealing with the Italians and the Ottomans and the Holy Roman Empire and the Balkan states and you know, for a while it was the Mongolians and other states in Central Asia that were in between India and China. The European states on the Atlantic coast develop technology that allows them to be even more adventurous than the Vikings and to go into the open Atlantic, which was never possible before, because the Atlantic Ocean is incredibly dangerous. If you took a ship out there and you got caught in a storm, you were dead. So you needed to have navigation to find your way, because you could easily get lost in this enormous sea that's like hundreds of times bigger than any other sea that the Europeans would navigate. You know, the Mediterranean Sea was often called the Roman Lake, essentially because, you know, it's quite, the weather in the Mediterranean Sea is pretty mild. As soon as you get out past Africa and Spain and the edge of Europe, you're exposed to all the wind and the power of the currents and the temperature and the climate of the Atlantic, which is a totally different level. So the Roman ships, Romans were not really particularly good shipbuilders. The fact that the Vikings could make it all the way to Canada 1,000 years ago is really miraculous. They had exceptional navigation ability, and they had exceptional shipbuilding technology, but it was more for moving limited amounts of equipment and raiders and traders. What the Europeans are going to try and do now is try to reach India and China directly by various routes. They try a few different ones before they get it right. And what they're going to try to do is fill a ship full of spices and full of silk and full of pottery and other precious manufactured goods and products from Asia, which the Europeans consider they don't have. They're very luxurious and they're in high demand, and over time others will be added: tobacco, sugar, cotton. But in the beginning, when Columbus makes his journey, in the age of exploration sort of gets kicked off by his effort. After him, then the regularity, the frequency of voyages across the ocean and to various places just picks up exponentially. So that's why Christopher Columbus, he is Italian. He's from Genoa, and he sails under the flag of Spain when he makes his voyage to the New World. But he's not the first one to go to the Americas, and calling the Americas the New World is very misleading. In some ways, it is the Old World as much as it is the New World, because Europe, and you could say Europe is the continent that is reviving and becoming a new world. Recovering its culture and reviving its political systems, and its society is becoming more complex. These societies in South America, North America, in the Mississippi Valley, in the Great Plains, the Aztecs in Mexico, the Inca in Peru and South America, in the Andes Mountains. These are very, very old civilizations. Lots of them are can trace their lineage back to previous civilizations, which we are still discovering and learning about. Whereas we've talked about already, the English kind of don't exist until the Romans leave, I would say. Like the English as a civilization start to manifest themselves with the invasion of the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes, and the consolidation of the Seven Kingdoms. The Viking invasions solidify this idea that we're all part of England and we're English. And then from there they start expanding over hundreds and hundreds of years to become a British culture. But we'll have to put that story, we'll have to pause that story for a moment. Christopher Columbus actually had a lot of trouble trying to sell his idea of let me go around the world the other way in order to reach India and the spice markets and the Malabar coast and the Philippines, right? To get nutmeg and cloves and pepper and so on. These are spices that people used for food, but which was very important because a lot of food was sort of going bad as you ate it. So you needed to sort of add something to make it edible. You don't want to be eating old meat without any pepper or other spices to like sort of mask the fact that it's probably not very good to eat anymore. But beyond the fact that it's just enhancing taste, a lot of these things people considered, Europeans considered them medicinal as well. So like cloves and nutmeg were used in medicine, like when you got sick, when you had a fever, when you had an illness of the body, something, you lost your appetite or you had headaches and stuff like that. They used these spices, made concoctions, drinks out of them and stuff, and ground them into powders, and they were very expensive and very rare. So not only did the rich people want them to make their food taste better, but they also wanted the spices because they thought this would make them healthy. And to a certain extent, the spices do, soothe your throat, sore throat, or your runny nose, or your ear aches and stuff like that. These things are true. Some of them. It's not all, hocus pocus or imaginary. What can I say? Like cheaters trying to sell magic solutions, but there was lots of that too. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of fake medicine in the Middle Ages too. So when it's 1492, which this is another number that I'm going to insist that you remember, because everybody, if you're British, you got to remember 1066 and 1707. 1066 is when William the Conqueror took over the British Isles. He was the last foreign conqueror to do that successfully. And 1707 is the date of the Act of Union, which creates the state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, which includes the Kingdom of Scotland joining the Kingdom of England officially as a state. So the King of England is the King of Scotland, and England, they cease to exist. Great Britain is essentially a country. Scotland and England are not anymore. And it also includes the Kingdom of Ireland as a sort of, it's almost like a colonial attachment that makes the United Kingdom of Great Britain immediately an imperial state, because Ireland isn't part of the Union. It's a subject of the Union. So it's got an empire immediately. They've already started going to America though. In the 1600s, early 1600s, they finally established colonies in Jamestown and the Massachusetts Bay Area. So Boston will soon spring up, and Richmond and Jamestown in Virginia, and the tobacco trade will get going. But that's still hundreds of years in the future when Columbus decides that he's going to do this voyage. So he is kind of like a businessman where he goes to different states. Genoa is not interested in sending him, so he needs to get sponsored, kind of. So he goes to different Italian states, and he goes to the King of Spain, King and Queen of Spain. He goes to the King of England, Henry VII, Henry VIII's father. But Henry VII is very stingy, and he has no interest in spending any money on ships and a voyage that he thinks is a very, very unlikely. It's very unlikely to be successful. So he rejects his proposal. But in 1491, the Spanish consolidate their kingdoms into Spain. There was Aragon, remember Catherine of Aragon. There was Aragon and Castile, and Barcelona is in Catalonia. These parts of Spain are still sort of distinct. There was Muslim parts and there was Christian parts. The Christian parts unified, and the last Islamic caliphate in southern Spain, Granada, was defeated, and the caliph withdrew to Africa. So 1491, what they call the Reconquista, the reconquering of Spain by the Christians from Islam, which was a crusade in itself. It took almost 800 years for this to be completed. That happened in 1491. So suddenly Spain was a country. Portugal was on its, a chunk out of its west side, but all these kingdoms, Christian kingdoms, became one unified country under Ferdinand and Isabella, the parents of Catherine of Aragon, who marries Henry VIII and gives birth to Mary, who becomes Bloody Mary. It's all connected, okay? But we're going to try and focus on America, so we're still talking about Europe, but trust me, we're moving towards American culture very rapidly here. So Columbus, much later, he gets adopted as an Italian American, but he is Italian, and he flies under the flag of Spain. He gets 3 pretty bad quality ships: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They're basically the worst ships in the Spanish Navy. But Queen Isabella thinks that this is worth a shot, and they have less enemies. They have less obligations than they did in the last decade or so of continuing to fight against the Caliphate of Granada. So now that they're free to pursue other things, so this is one of the things they pursue. He ends up going across the ocean, and this is not because he convinces them that the world is round and everybody else thinks the world is flat. Everybody knows by this point. The Greeks knew. It's totally, the flat earth thing is totally like a stupid 20th century invention where people look back and think, oh yeah, medieval people thought the world was flat and that you would sail off the edge if you went into the ocean. Very few people believed that. There were Greek philosophers and mathematicians that calculated the circumference of the Earth to within 1,000 kilometers. Like, they knew the Earth was round. The fact that Christianity and religion put the Earth at the center of the solar system, and then Copernicus and Galileo had to convince the church that the Earth was not the center of the solar system. That's another issue. Nobody was saying that the Earth was flat and that it was at the center of the solar system. Everybody was saying the geocentric universe made sense. The Earth was a round ball in the middle, and then everything else was in spheres around the Earth. But that geocentric model was demolished by Copernicus and Galileo Galilei, like I said, which they had to suffer a lot of persecution from the church in order to get everybody to agree to that. So it was well established in general, just the church was resisting the idea that the Earth wasn't the center of the solar system. But that had nothing to do with what Christopher Columbus was trying to do, which was just get to India around the other side, going the other way around the earth. And Isabella and Ferdinand thought that was perfectly reasonable. The thing that Columbus did that was a big mistake is that he completely underestimated the size of the Atlantic plus the Americas plus the Pacific. He thought the distance would be comparable, right, to the land journey. Going from Spain to Japan would be about the same distance as the distance from Spain going past the Americas, which he didn't know existed, and across the Pacific Ocean. But to his dismay, and to everybody else's shock and dismay, there were continents in the way, and there was an ocean that was much, much bigger, 3 times bigger than the Atlantic Ocean, and was larger than Africa, Europe, and Asia combined. So you had to get across the Pacific Ocean, which ironically is called the Pacific Ocean, the peaceful ocean, which it is not. It's the most dangerous ocean. It's the largest. It has the biggest storms. It has all the typhoons that crash into China and Korea and the Philippines and Guam and Japan every year. The Pacific is the most dangerous geographical area on the earth, and they had to get across that, which Christopher Columbus did not consider at all. Anyway, other people made some of these journeys over to the Americas. It's entirely possible that 100 or 200 years before Columbus, that some Chinese treasure ships made it all the way across the Pacific. They went to India and Africa. They went into Indonesia. They went possibly all the way down towards Australia and across island chains, even to California. We don't really know for sure how far they made it, because most of the records and the ships themselves were completely destroyed. When the Ming Dynasty was founded, they decided that this expensive exploration and outward sort of expansion of Chinese culture was negative. And so they destroyed all of these enormous ships that were way, way ahead of European technology. They destroyed all of them. And you got rid of all the records and like all the stories. So we have limited amounts of information about that brief period of Chinese exploration, but it did happen 200 years before the Europeans started doing their thing. But anyway, Christopher Columbus makes it somehow in his poorly equipped boats across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean. He's helped by the currents and the wind, sort of accidentally, and it pushes him south as he goes across. So he ends up in the Caribbean. He doesn't end up in Canada or America or even Mexico. He ends up in the islands. He lands probably somewhere on the east side of Haiti, which was known as, they called it Española, which is, New Spain, Spanish island. Now the western part is Haiti, which is French, Haitian people. They speak Haitian French, and the east part of the island is the Dominican Republic, which they speak Spanish primarily, but speak English also. So this is where he lands, and he's expecting it to be Japan or one of the islands in the Philippines, but he ends up being way, way off. This is why we call the islands there still the West Indies, as if it has anything to do with India, which it doesn't. And for hundreds of years later, the Spanish insisted that it was India, despite all the evidence. And in English, the Americans and Canadians called the people Indians, right? We called the Iroquois, the Cree, the Arawak, the Sioux, all these tribes, the Algonquin, they all have their own names. The Inuit in northern Canada, they have their own names, and they're not Indian at all. They're American. America is actually comes from a person named Vespucci. I'm sorry, Amerigo Vespucci, who was an Italian explorer after Columbus, and he sort of was a cartographer. So he started making maps of North America and South America, and then poor Columbus didn't. It's not North Columbia and South Columbia. Unfortunately, his name got shunted aside because these maps of Vespucci's maps got distributed, and he called them after himself. So we ended up with Americans. But anyway, native people to those continents were referred to as Indians for hundreds of years, and people still call them Indias when people who are from India live in India, in South Asia, not in Canada or Mexico or South America or the United States. So he's got some pretty negative legacies. When he encountered these people, they were a group of people that related. We call them Arawak, but it was a particular group of Arawak people. But for the most part, they were quite short, and they lived on Hispaniola and other islands in the Caribbean, and they were very peaceful people, probably because of the fact that they lived in islands with less competition. It wasn't like Europe, where France and England and Spain and Portugal and the Dutch and the Germans and the Italians were constantly trying to kill each other. Instead, they just had enough space and enough land and enough resources to establish villages and to live peacefully. And they had enough, there was not very much disease. There was really no reason to fight. There was no competition over resources. There wasn't overpopulation, and people weren't dying. And people, I mean, human greed sort of comes out of this, desperation for resources. The fighting between a lot of European countries was based on religion or competition for resources or trying to control populations so that, I'm a king, so I could, maintain my lifestyle. I had to not only, fight against other kingdoms, but I also had to, oppress and subjugate my own people. Remember King John and Edward II and Richard II and all those bad English kings. Ultimately, they got killed or removed or had to give up some of their power because their main object was just to maintain their authority and their status. But the Arawak didn't have any of these features in their society, but the Spanish did. So when the Spanish arrived in their ships with steel weapons, guns, horses, armor, and met them, the Arawak just swam out to meet them, and they were all, surprised and interested and gave them gifts of food and met them with no malicious intent, no evil intent. They were completely innocent of trying to defend themselves or lie or cheat or take advantage of the Spanish. Whereas the Spanish were there because Christopher Columbus was an aggressive international trader, not traitor, but trader. He was there to make money. He was there to find spices and commodities and bring them back to Spain and make himself rich and his sponsors, King and Queen Isabella, rich as well. But what he found was a bunch of peaceful, not particularly, strong or big or powerful people. So the only real thing that he saw of value was perhaps making them into slaves, like making them work and using their labor. But they weren't very good workers, and they were very susceptible to all the diseases that the Europeans were bringing from their dirty cities, which had been developing from living in disgusting conditions close together, often in proximity with animals. Like there's some of the deadliest diseases we have. COVID might be one of them too. We are still not sure about that, but avian flu and stuff. The diseases that jump from species to species often kill a lot of people because we don't have immunity to diseases from other species. So all of these things, all these factors basically contributed to Columbus trying to find gold or spices or silk or precious metals or jewels or anything that he could bring back to Europe, and not finding anything, becoming frustrated and disillusioned, and then taking out his frustration on the population, capturing them, threatening them, attacking them, enslaving them, as if they're not human beings, but like lesser, and like treating them like animals rather than treating them like human beings as they were, with their own language and their own culture. So that's why in the book you'll see it's a pretty harsh title that I give him, but I don't think I'm wrong in giving it to him. I give him credit on page 135 by calling him Christopher Columbus, the master navigator, but also a genocidal governor, because he becomes he is given control over Hispaniola and the newly established area, which will Mexico will eventually become New Spain, but he will go back and forth multiple times in an attempt to bring back things of value, and he will fail. And as a result of his treatment and the policies of the governors after him, every single Arawak person will die, and their group, their tribe will become extinct. And the word for that in English is genocide. When you kill an entire group of people and there's nobody left, that is genocide. Obviously, the disease played the largest role, but his complete disregard for trying to treat them humanely, as they are human. Even you shouldn't treat animals the way he treated those people. That I think falls within the definition of genocide. So you'll have to read just a few pages to catch up to what I'm saying, and I'm going to lecture on a few things that are not in the textbook on Friday, just to link, because the next thing in the textbook is America becoming independent, the American Revolutionary War, and 1492 to 1776 is too big of a jump. So on Friday, you'll have to listen carefully and take some notes, because some of the stuff isn't in the textbook. We'll kind of come back and talk more about the native people later, but I want to talk about the development of the colonies, which by 1776 there are 13 of them. And I need to talk to you a little bit about Canada and British North America, and how France develops its colonies, and how Spain, in Mexico, has an effect on how America develops too. So we'll work our way through this chapter, most of it on Friday, and then I'll wrap up what I need to say on next Wednesday in the next video lecture, so that everybody's ready for the quiz. But this quiz will cover basically from Columbus to the end of the American Revolutionary War. Okay, so welcome back, and I hope your midterms are all done, and that you can get a little bit of relaxation. There's no homework or quizzes this week, so I'll just see you in lecture on Friday, and we'll go from there. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.